A corrupt logging tycoon sent his enforcers to a quiet farmhouse to force a young widow off her land. They thought it would be easy, just another signature, another broken family. But when they shoved her son to the ground and laughed in her face, they didn't realize they had just crossed a line they could never uncross. Because the man passing by on a roaring Harley wasn't a stranger. He was a Marine veteran, now a drifter on the open road, trying to forget the pain of losing his wife and himself along the way. And the German shepherd riding beside him wasn't just a dog. It was a trained K9 who still remembered one word: guard. What happened next would shake their town to its core and remind everyone that even in the darkest night, justice still rides. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more. The wind that drifted through the pines carried a faint scent of rain and wood smoke. It whispered down the winding road that cut through Maple Hollow, a forgotten town tucked between misty hills and a silver-blue lake that reflected the dying sun. To strangers, it was just another quiet place on the map, one of those towns where time moved slower than anywhere else. But for Ethan Cole, it was a chance to disappear. He rode his old Harley-Davidson Softail, the chrome dulled by dust, its steady rumble echoing like a heartbeat through the trees. Behind him ran a large German shepherd, Shadow, his only companion for the last 5 years. Shadow was 9 now, a massive dog with a thick black and tan coat streaked with silver around the muzzle. His eyes, amber and alert, held the same quiet watchfulness as his master's. They had been through deserts, rainstorms, motels, and graveyards, 2 souls bound by the kind of silence only war and loss could forge. Ethan himself was a man carved out of stone and solitude. At 43, his once dark hair had streaks of gray near the temples. His jaw was square, marked by a small scar that ran down from his cheek to his chin. His beard was trimmed short, but the stubble never quite left him. He carried himself with the posture of a Marine, upright, purposeful, but there was a tiredness in his shoulders, the kind that came from fighting battles no one saw. His eyes were steel gray, unreadable, the color of storm clouds above a quiet sea. He didn't talk much, not to people anyway. Words, to him, felt like things that had been used up long ago. But he talked to Shadow sometimes, in low tones when the night got too long. The dog would listen without interrupting, and that, to Ethan, was enough. Maple Hollow wasn't part of his plan. He didn't have one. The town had simply appeared after a long stretch of forest road, like a mirage with a gas station, a few wooden houses, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since 1978. Ethan saw a sign that read, "Garage for Rent," behind the mill, and decided it was as good a place as any to stop breathing dust for a while. The garage was old but sturdy. Rusted corrugated roof, wide doors that creaked like old bones, and the faint smell of oil and pine sap. He swept the floor, fixed a loose hinge, and spread his blanket in a corner. It wasn't home, but it was shelter. Shadow circled twice before lying beside him. For the first time in months, Ethan slept without keeping his boots on. The next morning he rode into town to buy coffee and a few cans of food. People stared, the way small towns always do when someone new arrives. The clerk at the general store, an elderly woman with round glasses, said cautiously, "Don't get many bikers through here." Ethan only nodded, dropping a 20 on the counter. By afternoon, the weather shifted. The light softened, and a cool wind carried the smell of pine needles. Ethan rode down the old highway, again, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence in his head. That was when he saw them. 3 men in dirty jackets standing in front of Miller's Grocery, a small wooden store near the crossroads. Their laughter was harsh, the kind that scraped the air raw. In front of them stood a woman clutching a grocery bag and a small boy who couldn't have been older than 8. The bag spilled. Oranges rolled across the gravel. One of the men grabbed her wrist, yanking her back when she tried to pick them up. Ethan slowed the Harley, the engine growling low. Shadow barked once, sharp and cold. The men turned, irritation flashing into arrogance. "Keep riding, old man," one said, spitting on the ground. "Ain't your business." Ethan's boots hit the dirt. He took a step forward, calm but deliberate. His voice was low, even. "Let her go." The man laughed. "What are you, her guard dog?" Ethan didn't answer. Shadow stood beside him, fur bristling, a rumbling growl vibrating through his chest. The biggest of the 3 reached into his jacket as if daring him to move. But Ethan was already there. He moved like a ghost, swift, controlled. A fist connected with the man's throat, another strike to the ribs, and the fight ended before it began. The other 2 stumbled back in shock, one tripping over a crate. Shadow lunged forward, stopping inches from their legs, snarling deep enough to freeze them in place. "Go," Ethan said. His tone was quiet, but it carried weight. The men hesitated, then scrambled to their truck and sped off down the dirt road, tires spinning dust into the air. When the silence returned, the woman still stood there, holding her son close. She was pale, shaken, but proud. Her name was Grace Miller, the widow who ran the store alone since her husband's death 2 years ago. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with chestnut-brown hair tied loosely at her neck, a soft oval face, and tired blue eyes that still held a flicker of defiance. Her hands, roughened by work, trembled slightly as she steadied the boy. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Ethan gave a small nod. "You okay?" Grace looked at him, studying his face for a moment. "Yes, we're fine. Just scared, I guess." The boy peered from behind her. He had a mop of light brown hair and freckles across his nose. "Mom, that's a big dog," he said in awe. "Is he a soldier too?" Ethan's mouth twitched into what might have been the shadow of a smile. "He used to be." Shadow wagged his tail once, then sat obediently at his side. Grace managed a faint smile in return. There was something fragile in her expression, something that stirred an ache deep in Ethan's chest. A memory of another woman, another afternoon, before everything had gone to ash. He turned toward his bike, ready to leave, but Grace spoke again. "They've been coming around for weeks, saying my land isn't mine anymore." Ethan hesitated. "Who?" "Harold Voss," she said quietly. "He owns the logging company out past the ridge. He wants to buy us out, but this store is all we have." He nodded once, eyes narrowing slightly. "Call the sheriff." She shook her head. "The sheriff doesn't come anymore." There was a silence that stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The boy's hand clutched his mother's dress. Ethan finally said, "Keep your doors locked tonight." He started the bike, the sound cutting through the still air. Grace called after him, "Wait, what's your name?" He looked back over his shoulder. "Ethan." "And the dog?" "Shadow." He revved the engine once, then rode off into the lengthening dusk. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something other than emptiness. Maybe it was the way the wind moved through the trees, or the way that woman had looked at him. Not with fear, but with recognition. Like she had seen the same kind of loss in his eyes that she carried in hers. That night, the wind howled outside the garage. Ethan lay on his cot, listening to the creak of the roof and the steady breathing of Shadow beside him. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, the woman's trembling hands, the boy's curious gaze, and those eyes that reminded him of the life he'd once had. Shadow stirred, sensing his unease. Ethan reached down, resting his hand on the dog's thick fur. "We're not staying long," he muttered, as if trying to convince himself. "Just a few days." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The road might have carried him through 100 towns, but Maple Hollow felt different. It was the kind of place that held you without asking, where ghosts found each other, and maybe if you were lucky, learned to breathe again. Outside, the pine trees swayed, their silhouettes dancing in the moonlight. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its cry fading into the sound of the wind. And in that wind, Ethan thought he heard something else, the faint echo of a voice from a life long gone. It said, "Stay." He didn't know if it was memory, madness, or mercy. But as he drifted into uneasy sleep, he felt it again. That fragile flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The morning sun slid over Maple Hollow, like pale gold poured across frost. Mist clung to the fields, turning every fence post and pine needle into something ghostly. Ethan rode down the gravel road, leading to Grace Miller's small farmhouse, the Harley's low growl scattering crows from the telephone lines. He hadn't meant to come back, but the image of the woman and her boy from yesterday refused to fade. There was something about her, about the quiet courage behind her trembling voice, that had stayed with him through the night. The Miller farm sat at the edge of the forest, a simple one-story house painted white long ago, its color now fading into the color of bone. The porch steps sagged, the barn leaned slightly to one side, and the field beyond it was overgrown with yellow grass. Grace was already outside, wearing a faded blue flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her hair, chestnut brown and pulled into a loose braid, caught the early light. She was trying to fix a broken section of the fence with nails too small and a hammer too light. Beside her, Ben, the boy with freckles and bright curiosity, struggled to keep a curious chicken from escaping through the gap. Ethan stopped the engine, boots crunching on gravel. "Need a hand?" Grace startled, then relaxed when she recognized him. "You again?" she said softly, smiling with an edge of disbelief. "You didn't have to come." "Didn't have anywhere else to be," he replied. She handed him the hammer, and together they worked in silence for a while. Ethan's movements were steady, precise. Grace watched how easily he handled things, like he'd been fixing fences his whole life. She didn't know that his hands, steady now, had once held a rifle for 12 years, in places where fences didn't last. When they finished, Grace brushed her palms on her jeans. "Thank you. I can't pay you much." "Didn't ask," Ethan interrupted. He nodded toward the pasture. "You've got good land here. Stream runs clear." Her expression changed, tightened, guarded. "For now, Harold Voss wants it." Ethan had heard the name. Everyone in the county knew him, the kind of man whose handshake was worth less than the pen he carried. Voss owned Apex Logging, the company that had cut half the hills bare in the last 5 years. He was in his late 50s, heavyset, with thinning blonde hair slicked back with oil and a gold ring he liked to flash in the sun. Rumor said he'd built his empire by bribing small-town councils and burying anyone who stood in his way, sometimes literally. Grace sighed. "He says the water under my land is part of a public aquifer. But my husband," her voice faltered, "my late husband, proved it wasn't. The deed's in my name, but ever since he died, Voss has been circling." Ethan looked out over the fields. The wind moved through the tall grass like something alive. "You been threatened?" Grace hesitated. "Yesterday wasn't the first time." Shadow, lying near the porch, lifted his head and growled softly, ears twitching. A pickup truck passed on the distant road, its tires crunching slow on the gravel before disappearing beyond the trees. "You should talk to the sheriff," Ethan said. Grace laughed once, bitterly. "The sheriff plays poker with Voss every Friday night." Ethan studied her face, the stubborn lift of her chin. "Then don't stand alone." She looked at him for a long moment, unsure what to say, then turned toward the house. "You and your dog want some coffee?" Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and old wood. The kitchen was small but tidy, filled with handmade things: curtains sewn from worn fabric, a chipped ceramic mug painted with flowers. A photo on the wall showed Grace's husband, a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands, holding Ben as a baby. There was dirt under his nails, even in the photograph. Ethan glanced at it, then looked away. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee. "I used to hate the quiet here," she said. "Now I hate when it's too quiet." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't need to. Silence was something both of them understood too well. Ben ran in, his cheeks red from playing outside. "Mom, Shadow's chasing the rooster again." Ethan almost smiled. Grace sighed, pretending to be annoyed, but her eyes softened. "You're a bad influence, mister," she teased. "Dog's got his own mind," Ethan replied. For a brief moment, laughter filled the house, a sound neither of them realized they'd been missing. That afternoon, Ethan rode into town for supplies. He stopped by the diner for a sandwich and coffee. It was there he met Ana Ruiz, the town's sheriff, and his old comrade. Ana was in her late 30s, tall, athletic, with sharp cheekbones and olive skin that spoke of her Mexican heritage. Her dark hair was cut short, practical for a uniformed life. There was a small scar along her left eyebrow, a souvenir from Fallujah. She'd served under Ethan's command once, and though years had passed, the weight of those memories lingered in the way they looked at each other. "Cole?" she said, eyes widening as she set down her coffee mug. "I'll be damned," Ethan nodded. "Didn't think I'd see another Marine here? Didn't think I'd see you anywhere." They sat. No salutes, no formalities, just 2 ghosts recognizing each other. Ana leaned back. "Heard you tangled with some of Voss's boys yesterday. Didn't like what they were doing." "Yeah, well, Voss owns half this town. Businesses, land, even a few deputies. You poke that bear, you'll find he bites hard." Ethan's voice was calm. "You letting him run things?" Anna's jaw tightened. "I'm doing what I can with what's left of the law." She hesitated, then added quietly, "You should stay out of it. Grace Miller's a good woman, but she's on a collision course. Voss doesn't lose." He finished his coffee, set down the mug, and looked her in the eye. "Neither do Marines." Anna sighed. Still the same stubborn bastard. He gave her a half smile. "That's why you followed me into that sandstorm, remember?" Her lips curved slightly, and nearly got killed for it. When Ethan left the diner, the sky had turned amber. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes following him. Maple Hollow wasn't as quiet as it pretended to be. That night, back at the garage, Shadow wouldn't settle. The dog paced near the door, ears pricked, low growl humming like a warning. Ethan stepped outside, scanning the dark line of trees beyond the dirt road. A pair of headlights flickered there, just for a moment, then vanished. He waited, listening. Only the wind moved. Later, he rode toward Grace's farm. The fields shimmered under the moonlight, silver grass bending under a restless breeze. Her house was dark, save for a faint glow from the kitchen window. As he parked the bike, Shadow stiffened again, nose pointing toward the woods. Ethan crouched beside him, whispering, "What is it, boy?" The shepherd whined softly, gaze fixed on the tree line. Then a sound. A door shutting gently, too distant to be from the house. He stayed there for another 10 minutes, watching, waiting, but nothing moved. When he finally rode back to the garage, the unease followed him like a shadow that refused to be shaken. He'd seen too many war zones to mistake calm for safety. Somewhere out there, the next move was already being planned. And this time, it wasn't just about a piece of land or a business dispute. It was about control, power, and the kind of corruption that crawled under a town's skin until it owned everything, including the law. He poured himself a drink, staring at the cracked window. "We're in it now, Shadow," he murmured. The dog lay at his feet, eyes still alert even in rest. Outside, thunder rumbled far to the west, the kind that promised a storm was coming. And for Ethan Cole, storms had a way of finding him. The day broke dull and gray, with clouds hanging low over Maple Hollow like a heavy blanket. The fields were slick with dew, and the wind carried the scent of wet pine and diesel from the nearby lumber trucks. Ethan Cole stood outside the garage, hands buried in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, watching the clouds gather in the distance. Shadow paced beside him, tail stiff, nose twitching. The dog had been restless all morning, a sign Ethan had learned never to ignore. By late afternoon, the peace of the day shattered. The sound of engines broke the quiet. A black pickup and an old blue sedan rolled up the dirt road leading to Grace Miller's farm. Ethan's gut tightened. He was on his bike within seconds, Shadow running alongside as the wind whipped past. When he reached the property, the gate lay open, swinging on one hinge, and the front yard was filled with the angry voices of men. 3 figures loomed near the porch. They were the same type he'd seen 1,000 times, men who hid behind money and orders, used to breaking things that didn't belong to them. The leader, Lyle Dent, was tall, with a thick neck and sunburned skin that peeled near his collar. His hair was greasy, his beard uneven. Lyle's younger brother Troy, shorter and leaner, wore a baseball cap pulled low, and the third man, Cliff, was quiet, his pale eyes darting from side to side like a snake waiting to strike. Grace stood in front of the porch, shielding Ben with her body. "You have no right to be here," she said, her voice shaking but steady. Lyle smirked. "Lady, we're just doing our job. Mr. Voss wants a word about that little stream of yours. You sign, this all goes away." He stepped closer, and when Grace backed up, Troy kicked over a bucket of feed, spilling it across the dirt. "Mom, don't!" Ben cried, trying to pull at her sleeve. Troy shoved the boy roughly aside, and before the echo of that motion faded, Ethan's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't touch him." The men turned. The biker stood at the edge of the yard, helmet under one arm, eyes cold as slate. Shadow stood beside him, hackles raised, low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Lyle laughed. "Look what we got here. The hero again." "Last warning," Ethan said. Troy spat on the ground. "You don't scare us, old man." Ethan's hand flexed slightly, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "Shadow guard." The dog shot forward, a blur of muscle and fury, hitting Troy square in the chest. The man fell backward, arms flailing, as Shadow pinned him. Teeth bared inches from his face. Lyle swung a wrench, but Ethan moved first. His right arm blocked the strike, his left hand twisting Lyle's wrist until the wrench dropped into the dirt. A quick knee to the gut sent him staggering. Cliff hesitated, pulling a knife from his pocket, but the sight of Ethan's glare, calm, unwavering, the same look he'd seen in Soldiers who'd already died once, froze him in place. "Pick him up," Ethan ordered, "and leave." They did. Lyle half-dragged his brother back to the truck, while Cliff kept glancing behind him, pale as wax. The engine roared, spraying gravel as they sped down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the stench of fear behind. Grace stood trembling, one arm still around Ben. Ethan called Shadow off, the dog trotting back obediently, tail wagging just once before sitting by his master's side. "You're both okay?" Ethan asked. Grace nodded, though her lips quivered. "They said they'd come back." "They will," Ethan said simply. "That's why we'll be ready." She looked at him, confusion and gratitude mixing in her eyes. "Why are you helping us?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted towards the tree line, where the wind rippled through the pines. "Because no one helped when it was my turn." That night, after ensuring Grace and Ben were safe inside, Ethan returned to the garage and began gathering supplies: a toolkit, a small ladder, motion sensors, and 2 small cameras he'd kept from his time overseas. By dawn, he was back at the Miller property, working silently. Grace watched from the porch as he climbed the fence posts, wiring the cameras along the edges of the field. Ben followed Shadow around, laughing softly whenever the dog licked his face. It was the first sound of joy Ethan had heard on that land. By mid-morning, Sheriff Anna Ruiz arrived, her cruiser kicking up dust along the road. She stepped out, one hand resting on her hip. Her eyes swept over the broken gate and the scattered debris. "You couldn't call me before turning Voss's thugs into fertilizer?" Ethan smirked. "Didn't have time." Anna sighed. "You're going to make this harder than it already is. You know that, right?" "Maybe," Ethan said, checking the angle of a camera. "But now you've got evidence. They won't walk in here so easy again." Anna crouched to examine one of the scuff marks on the porch. "You think I can just arrest them? Voss owns the judge, the council, half my deputies. The system's rotten, Ethan. You punch one piece, 3 more grow back." Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. "Then we cut deeper." She studied him a moment, the memory of who he used to be reflected in her eyes. "You're still fighting someone else's war," she said softly. "Maybe," he replied. "But this one's closer to home." Later that afternoon, Ethan stayed while Grace made lunch. She cooked stew with whatever she had: potatoes, carrots, a bit of leftover meat, and insisted he eat with them. The house was small but filled with warmth. Ben kept asking questions about Shadow: how fast he could run, if he'd ever been to war, what he ate. Ethan answered most with a shrug or a faint smile. Grace watched them quietly, a softness in her gaze he pretended not to notice. As he prepared to leave, she said, "I can't pay you, but thank you." "You already did," Ethan said. She frowned. "How?" "For reminding me what decent looks like." That evening, Ethan uploaded the camera feeds to a private drive and sent access to Anna. Then he sat outside the garage, the light fading, Shadow lying beside him. The town was quiet again, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before something worse. He lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl upward, blending with the dusk. He could still see the faces of those men, the smirks, the threats. He'd seen their kind in 100 places, men who preyed on the weak because no one stopped them. But this time, he was here. And he wasn't walking away. Across the road, the pines whispered in the wind, and somewhere beyond them, headlights flickered once before disappearing into the dark. Shadow growled softly. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He exhaled slowly, flicking the cigarette into the dirt. "Yeah," he muttered, almost to himself. "They'll be back." And when they did, He'd be waiting. The rain began before dawn, soft at first, then steady and relentless, drumming against the tin roof of the Miller farmhouse. The hills around Maple Hollow vanished behind a wall of gray mist, and the pine trees swayed, whispering secrets in the wind. Ethan Cole stood by the window, coffee steaming in his calloused hands, watching the world turn silver with rain. Shadow sat by the door, tail curled tight, ears flicking at every rumble of thunder. It had been a rare few days of peace. Too rare. In that time, he'd helped Grace rebuild her garden, fix the porch roof, and replant the rows of vegetables destroyed by the storm. He'd shown Ben how to handle a hammer properly, how to pat Shadow on the neck, so the dog would take it as respect, not play. The boy followed him everywhere, shadowing his steps the way the shepherd shadowed Ethan's. One evening, while the rain thickened into sheets, Grace brewed tea by the fire. The small living room glowed warm, filled with the scent of chamomile and smoke. She sat opposite Ethan, her hands wrapped around a chipped blue mug, her eyes reflecting the flickering flame. Her voice was soft, almost lost under the rain. My husband, Mark. He was one of the foremen at the timber mill. The night the mine collapsed, they said it was just an accident. But he'd warned them for weeks. The supports were failing, and the company didn't care. They pushed through the job to meet their quota. He stayed to pull his men out. He never came back. Ethan said nothing at first. The firelight caught the lines around his eyes, deepened by memories. Finally, he said, "They buried him with his honor. Not many men get that anymore." Grace smiled faintly, eyes shining. "Honor doesn't pay for groceries." He looked into the fire, his reflection distorted in the flames. "My wife died in a house fire. Electrical fault, they said. I was overseas when it happened. Came home to ashes and a folded flag." His voice didn't crack, but there was something hollow in it, like a door closing quietly on an old wound. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was shared. Two broken lives finding a rhythm in the same quiet pain. Outside, the rain softened, tapping gently against the window like a steady heartbeat. Shadow stirred, resting his head on Ethan's boot, eyes half open, alert even in calm. Ben had fallen asleep on the couch, one hand clutching Shadow's tail like a child might hold a safety rope. Grace looked at the two of them and whispered, "He hasn't slept that peacefully in months." Ethan's gaze softened. "He's safe here." Grace nodded, but a shadow crossed her face. "For now." Across town, in an office smelling of whiskey and wet paper, Harold Voss slammed his fist on his desk. His shirt clung to his heavy frame, and the rain leaking from the window had soaked through the papers scattered before him. Permits, deeds, and half-signed contracts. The apex. Logging project. His grand plan for a luxury resort and private marina was bleeding money. Investors were withdrawing, and deadlines were closing in. "This woman is ruining me," he spat. Across from him, a man sat in silence, calmly watching the storm through the glass. Carl Denton was not a man of many words. He was in his 40s, broad-shouldered but wiry, with a face that seemed carved from stone, creased and unyielding. His dark blonde hair was cut close to the scalp, and a faint scar ran from his right temple to his cheek. He had once served in private security overseas, specializing in containment. People like him didn't ask for details. They just made problems disappear. Voss leaned forward. "You're not cheap, Denton. I expect this to end quietly. I don't want the cops sniffing around. That ex-Marine's been meddling. Handle him, handle the woman, and make it look like a break-in gone wrong." Denton's voice was low, even. "You want it quiet. Quiet costs extra." Voss didn't flinch. "Whatever it takes, just fix it." Denton stood, his coat dark against the pale lamplight. I'll need a map of the property. And no more amateurs. You send your idiots again, I walk. When he left, Voss leaned back, chest heaving. The storm outside cracked with lightning, throwing his reflection across the window. A man cornered by his own greed. Back at the farmhouse, the world had settled into a hush. Grace cleaned up the dishes while Ethan checked the locks and the generator. The rain had begun to ease, though the sky still boiled with dark clouds. As he stepped onto the porch, he paused. Shadow stood at the edge of the yard, ears pointed towards the forest. "What is it, boy?" Ethan whispered. The shepherd growled low in his throat, a warning rumble that came from instinct, not fear. The wind carried something different now, an unfamiliar scent, faint but sharp, like oil and cold metal. Ethan's hand went to the pistol holstered under his jacket. He scanned the tree line, but the mist was too thick. Only the sound of rain dripping from the leaves answered him. After a long moment, he called Shadow back inside, though the dog obeyed reluctantly, his eyes never leaving the woods. Later that night, Grace sat by the fire again, wrapping Ben in a blanket. Ethan stayed awake, listening. The ticking of the old clock mixed with the sigh of the wind. Every instinct in him screamed that the quiet was wrong, that somewhere out there, someone was moving closer. Far beyond the farm, Carl Denton parked his truck under the cover of trees. He moved like a predator, checking the rifle case behind his seat. No noise, no headlights. His breath fogged the glass as he studied the farmhouse through binoculars. A woman, a child, a man, and a dog. He made notes on a pad. Old habit. Efficiency was survival. But something about the man by the window, the way he moved, the awareness in his posture, made Denton pause. He'd seen that kind before. Soldiers. The kind who didn't panic. The kind who shot to end things, not to warn. He smiled grimly. This one'll be interesting. Back inside, Ethan finally allowed himself to rest, though his sleep was shallow. Dreams came in flashes. Sandstorms, fire, the echo of screams over radio static. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, the rain still whispering outside. Shadow was sitting upright, staring at the window. "Yeah," Ethan murmured, rubbing his temples. "I know. I feel it too." The dog turned his head slightly, eyes glinting in the half-light. Outside, the fog thickened again, swallowing the forest, the road, and everything beyond. It was as if the world had folded in on itself, leaving only them, and something waiting out there, unseen, but watching. The first shot wouldn't come that night. Not yet. But both man and beast knew it was coming. The storm was gathering, and its name was Carl Denton. The storm rolled in like an army. Lightning split the horizon, thunder cracked over the ridges, and sheets of rain blurred the outline of the Miller farmhouse into a trembling shadow. The world had turned silver and savage. Ethan Cole stood beneath the porch light, rain dripping from his jacket, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the tree line. Shadow stood beside him, fur slicked and ears upright. The shepherd didn't bark. He never barked unless he had to. He just waited, muscles coiled, breath steaming in the cold. Inside, Grace was moving quickly, gathering Ben's school bag, a flashlight, and a few photos from the mantel. The boy sat by the hearth, clutching Shadow's collar. The power had already flickered twice. Every time the lights dimmed, the storm seemed to move closer, like a predator sniffing its prey. Ethan's mind worked with military precision. He had prepared for this moment. The floodlights were wired to a generator. The perimeter fences were reinforced with tripwires and empty tin cans, makeshift alarms that clinked softly in the wind. Cameras he'd installed around the property fed into a small monitor in the living room. On a shelf above it, a radio hummed faintly, his only link to Sheriff Ana Ruiz. "Signal's holding," Anna's voice crackled through the static. "I've got 2 units nearby, but the road's flooding fast. You're on your own for at least 20 minutes. Ethan's tone was calm. "That's 19 more than I'll need." "Don't do anything stupid," Anna warned. "I'm long past stupid," he said, shutting the radio off. Out in the woods, Carl Denton crouched behind a fallen log, rain slicking down his face and rifle. His breath was slow, measured. Around him, his men, 5 in total, spread out in a semicircle. They were ex-military, like him, trained and dangerous. Each wore dark tactical gear that blended into the wet black of the trees. "Remember," Denton said into his mic, his voice barely audible over the storm. "No noise, no lights, in and out. We take the targets alive if possible. If not, clean finish." His men moved like shadows through the rain. The plan was simple. 2 from the north, 2 from the east, Denton from the west. He had studied the layout for days. But what he didn't know, what Voss's arrogance hadn't accounted for, was that Ethan had studied him too. The first man tripped a wire hidden beneath the mud. The metallic clink of cans cut through the rain. Floodlights exploded to life, bleaching the night white. Shadow lunged forward, a streak of black and tan fury, slamming into the man's legs. The mercenary hit the ground, rifle spinning away. Ethan was already there, a dark blur of motion, striking once, twice, quick, efficient. The man didn't get up. "Contact!" another mercenary shouted through his mic, but his voice was drowned by thunder. Denton cursed, signaling his flank forward. "Suppress and move." Bullets tore into the rain, sparks flying off the metal gate. Ethan ducked behind a wooden trough, returning fire with precise bursts. He wasn't aiming to kill, just to disable. Every shot was measured, deliberate. He knew he couldn't outgun them, but he could outthink them. Grace screamed from inside the house as a bullet shattered the window. "Ethan! I'm here!" he yelled back. "Stay low!" Shadow was already moving, darting through the rain toward the side of the barn. The dog's instincts were flawless. He could sense movement before it happened. When a mercenary tried to flank from the rear, Shadow met him mid-stride, jaws clamping on the man's wrist. The rifle clattered into the mud as the man screamed. Inside, Ben clutched his mother. Grace pulled him toward the cellar door, her breath coming in gasps. Smoke filled the kitchen. The barn outside was burning. Lightning had struck the roof, igniting the dry hay Ethan had stacked earlier. "Go," Ethan shouted, running through the downpour toward the flames. He ripped open the barn door, coughing through the smoke. Horses screamed in panic. Grace was there already, trying to free the last mare. "Get back," he barked. "I won't leave them," she cried. He didn't argue. Together they pulled the latch loose. The horse bolted into the storm, nearly knocking them both over. Grace stumbled, and Ethan caught her by the waist, dragging her clear as the roof caved in behind them. Fire met rain, sending a shower of steam into the night. "Ben!" she gasped. "He's safe," Ethan said, grabbing her hand. "Stay with me." Back at the tree line, Denton advanced through the chaos. He could see his men falling one by one. This wasn't supposed to happen. His jaw clenched as he fired a controlled burst at the house. The bullet tore into the porch post, inches from Ethan's shoulder. Ethan rolled behind the overturned water trough, mud streaking his face. The 2 men locked eyes through the rain. In another life, they might have served together. But tonight, they were on opposite sides of the same code. "You're good," Denton called out, voice even despite the storm. "Not good enough." Ethan replied, "You're right, I'm better." Lightning flashed, and the world turned white. When Denton blinked the glare away, Ethan was gone. The next second, he felt a hard strike across his ribs. The rifle dropped from his hands. Ethan's fist followed, a brutal arc that sent him sprawling into the mud, but Denton wasn't finished. He swept Ethan's legs, lunged forward, and the two men collided in the muck. They fought wordlessly, each strike heavy with purpose. Denton reached for a knife, but Shadow appeared, snarling, teeth bared. "Call him off," Denton hissed, blade trembling inches from Ethan's chest. Ethan's voice was quiet. "Shadow." The dog froze, eyes locked. Denton exhaled shakily, lowering his guard just enough. Ethan moved like lightning. He twisted Denton's wrist, disarming him, and pinned him to the ground with the same ruthless precision that had kept him alive in war. The sound of sirens rose through the rain. Blue and red lights flashed faintly in the distance. "Too late," Ethan said. Denton looked past him, realization dawning as he saw the small cameras mounted on the fence posts, blinking through the storm. Every moment had been recorded. When the sheriff's cruisers arrived, Ana Ruiz stepped out, soaked to the bone, but grinning grimly. Her deputies cuffed the surviving mercenaries, pulling them out of the mud. "Guess you didn't need 20 minutes after all," she said. Ethan handed her the drive from his camera system. "It's all there, enough to bury Voss and his company for good." Grace came running, Ben clinging to her hand, both of them dripping wet but alive. She stopped a few feet away, eyes wide with relief and disbelief. Ethan turned towards them, exhaustion lining his face. For the first time, the war inside him felt quiet. The storm eased, thunder rolling off into the distance. Shadow sat beside him, tongue lolling, fur streaked with soot and rain. Grace stepped closer, voice trembling. "You saved us." Ethan shook his head. "No. You gave me something worth fighting for." The blue lights reflected in his eyes as the rain softened into mist. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole wasn't just surviving. He was home. The rain had stopped, leaving Maple Hollow wrapped in the quiet hum of a world trying to breathe again. The morning mist clung to the trees, and the smell of wet pine drifted through the air. Smoke still rose faintly from the burnt edge of Grace's barn, a reminder of the night that had nearly destroyed everything. Ethan Cole stood by the fence, hammering the last plank back into place, his left shoulder bandaged, his jaw set. Shadow lay nearby, watching him, one ear twitching at every sound. Grace hung fresh laundry on the line, white sheets that fluttered like fragile peace flags. Ben played with a wooden toy plane Ethan had carved for him. The house, once filled with fear, now rang with the sound of laughter. Even the wind seemed softer. Ana Ruiz drove up the muddy road just after noon, her patrol car streaked with dirt. She stepped out, removing her sunglasses, revealing eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "You look like hell," Ethan said, half smiling. She chuckled faintly. "Takes one to know one." Then her tone changed. "I came to tell you it's over. Voss made bail last night." Ethan froze. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. The DA's office says new evidence came in, technical issues with the footage, chain of custody problems." He frowned. "You're telling me the proof we bled for just vanished?" Anna's jaw tightened. "No, I'm telling you someone erased it." Hours later, the truth surfaced like oil on water. Anna's contact in the State Department confirmed it. The case files, forensic data, and footage had been seized by a team acting under the authority of Satori International, the multinational conglomerate that owned Apex Logging. They called it a corporate oversight review. In reality, it was a cleanup operation. That night, Ethan waited in the dim light of the garage as Anna paced, clutching her phone. The storm clouds outside had given way to a restless wind that rattled the windows. "They're sending a team to retrieve sensitive property," she said. "Ethan, that means us. The hard drives, the backups, everything. He nodded slowly, his mind already calculating. Then we go public before they bury it, all of it. Raw footage, names, dates, everything you've got. Anna hesitated. If we do that, we cross a line we can't uncross. He met her gaze. I crossed that line the day they came for her and her kid. By midnight, the small police station at Maple Hollow was nearly empty. Only the buzz of fluorescent lights filled the silence. Ethan, Anna, and Shadow were there. Just 3 figures in a battle bigger than the town itself. Grace had begged him not to go, but he'd promised he'd come back. Anna sat at her desk, typing fast. Ethan connected the last of the hard drives to her computer. This feed goes straight to independent media, she said, glancing at him. If we can get 10 minutes of upload time, the rest will spread on its own. Then we hold them off for 10 minutes, Ethan replied. At 12:23 a.m., the first SUV appeared. Black, unmarked, headlights off. Then another. The sound of boots splashing through puddles echoed from the street. Ethan cut the lights. The station plunged into darkness, lit only by the glow of the monitor. Shadow growled, low and deep. They're here, Ethan whispered. The door burst open. 3 men in tactical suits swept in, rifles raised. Their movements were clean, professional, too organized for local cops. Behind them, a 4th man in a black raincoat entered. His face was pale, angular, and calm. Agent Marcus Hale, head of Satori's Internal Security Division. Early 40s, tall, hair slicked back, his voice smooth as glass and twice as cold. Mr. Cole, he said evenly, you're in possession of corporate property. Surrender the drives, and this ends quietly. Ethan stood between them and Anna. You're standing in a police station. You got a warrant? Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. We don't need one. The first shot wasn't from Ethan. It came from Anna, controlled, deliberate, hitting the knee of the nearest agent. Chaos erupted. Shadow lunged, slamming into another man, sending his rifle skidding across the floor. Ethan fired twice, aiming low, dropping another before the muzzle flash blinded the room. Keep uploading, he shouted. Anna's fingers flew over the keyboard, the progress bar crawling, 48%, 62%, 89%, until a bullet shattered the monitor glass. Sparks flew. She screamed, ducking behind the desk. They hit the main drive, she yelled. Ethan dragged a smaller device from his jacket, a backup SSD. Not this one, he said, plugging it into a secondary port. The feed flickered back to life. Hale advanced slowly, gun raised. You can't win, Cole. We own the story. We own the truth. Ethan aimed back. Then let's see how you handle the light. He pulled the trigger. The shot missed Hale by inches but hit the fire alarm panel behind him. The sprinklers roared to life, drenching the room. Water poured over the electronics, smoke curling up as the system flickered. But not before the final message appeared on the cracked screen. Upload complete. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder. State police units, called by Anna's earlier distress beacon, swarmed the street. Hale cursed under his breath, signaling his men to retreat. They vanished into the rain like ghosts. When the officers burst in moments later, they found Ethan sitting against the wall, blood on his shoulder, Shadow pressed close, and Anna kneeling beside him. The shattered screen still glowed faintly with one open window, an email chain between Satori executives, proof of their interference. The next morning, headlines spread across the internet. Multinational cover-up exposed in small American town. Independent media picked up the story within hours. Protests ignited across the state. The corporation that had thought itself untouchable was bleeding in the daylight. Ethan returned to Grace's farmhouse just after sunrise. His shirt was torn, his arm wrapped in gauze. Grace met him at the gate, eyes wide with fear and relief. Ben ran to him, and Shadow barked softly, wagging his tail. "You're hurt," Grace said, voice trembling. "It's nothing," Ethan whispered, pulling her into an embrace. "It's over." She looked at him, tears mixing with the dawn light. "How do you know?" "Because the truth's out," he said softly. "And once it's out, they can't bury it again." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb lingering just long enough to remind him that life could still be gentle. "I lost everything once," he murmured. "But not this time. Not you." Outside, the sun broke over the hills, cutting through the mist. Maple Hollow shimmered under the light. Fragile, alive, and free, the last shadow had passed, leaving only morning behind. The snow line on the northern ridges had begun to fade, and with it, the last traces of winter's bitterness. Maple Hollow was slowly breathing again. Birds returned to the pines. The air smelled of wet soil and smoke from morning fires, and for the first time in years, people walked through town without looking over their shoulders. The storm had passed. Not just the one in the sky, but the one that had haunted every corner of this quiet valley. Satori International was under investigation across 3 continents. Its boardrooms, once cloaked in power and secrecy, were now flooded with subpoenas and flashing cameras. Harold Voss, bloated, red-faced, and stripped of the arrogance that had once filled every gesture, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. His empire was gone, his money frozen, and his name spoken only in whispers. For Ana Ruiz, the storm left scars of its own. She stood on the courthouse steps as the verdict was read, her uniform pressed, her face pale under the morning light. Reporters crowded, shouting questions, but she didn't answer. Only when she saw Ethan standing near the edge of the crowd, plain clothes, leather jacket, Shadow sitting calmly at his feet, did her eyes soften. Later, over a cup of coffee in the station, she said quietly, "You did it, Cole." Ethan shook his head. "We did it. You just didn't run when the rest did." She smiled faintly. "That's the problem with people like us. We only know how to move forward." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on the horizon through the window. "Forward, yeah, but not always home." When he left the station, he had already made up his mind. He packed his few belongings, an old duffel bag, a box of tools, and the dog's worn leather leash, and strapped them to the back of his Harley. Grace's house lay a few miles up the road, but he didn't stop. Not yet. The road wound through the valley, the forest opening into soft meadows washed in morning light. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running toward or from anything. He was just moving. The wind was cold, the air clean, and for a brief moment he imagined his wife's laughter in the hum of the engine, soft, forgiving. He smiled to himself, then looked down. On the gas tank, something small fluttered in the wind, a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the strap of his saddlebag. He stopped at the roadside, pulling it free. The handwriting was crooked, childish. "Uncle Ethan, Mom laughs more when you're here. If you go, who's going to feed Shadow breakfast?" "Ben." Ethan stood there for a long time, rainwater from the trees dripping onto the paper. He felt something shift inside, a quiet warmth that no war, no wound, no loss could take. By afternoon, the sky had turned amber. Grace was in the garden, wearing a straw hat too big for her head, her hands covered in dirt as she tended to the flowers they had planted, together. The world around her seemed to glow in the late light. The rebuilt fence, the new barn, the scent of pine and wet earth. The rumble of a Harley broke the quiet. Grace froze, her heart skipping before she even turned around. The sound grew louder, closer, until the motorcycle appeared at the end of the path. Ethan parked by the gate, dust rising behind him. He took off his helmet, the wind tugging at his hair, and for the first time he smiled without restraint. "I thought you left," Grace said softly. He swung one leg off the bike. "I tried. The road didn't want me." She laughed, tears already forming in her eyes. "And what did the road say?" He looked around. The rebuilt barn, the flowers, the house glowing warm against the forest's edge. It said there are still a few things left to fix. Ben came running from the porch, his small boots splashing through puddles. "I told you he'd come back, Mom," he shouted, his grin wide as sunlight. Shadow barked once, tail wagging furiously, circling them like a sentry welcoming his commander home. Ethan crouched to ruffle the dog's head. "Missed you too, soldier." Grace wiped her hands on her apron, stepping closer. The space between them felt smaller than it ever had, filled with all the words they hadn't needed to say. "You don't have to fix everything, Ethan," she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes tired but calm. "Maybe not. But this," he gestured around, "this is worth keeping together." She smiled through tears. "Then stay." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a small wooden sign from the saddlebag, its surface freshly carved. He hung it on the gate post, stepping back to read it aloud. "Haven Springs, where the lost find home." Grace covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with quiet emotion. The setting sun painted everything gold. The road, the fields, even the scars on Ethan's hands. Ben clapped, Shadow barked again, and laughter filled the air like a hymn. As the light faded, Ethan stood beside Grace, his arm brushing hers. They watched the sun sink behind the pines, the world at peace for once. No medals, no headlines, no glory, just the small, sacred truth of survival, and the love that had grown, fragile but fierce, between broken hearts. The wind carried the scent of rain and the sound of a child's laughter. Somewhere in that sound, Ethan Cole finally heard what he'd been searching for all along: silence that felt like home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from heaven. They come quietly, through the hands of those who choose kindness over anger, courage over fear, and love over despair. In a small town like Maple Hollow, God didn't send angels with wings. He sent a weary soldier, a brave woman, a loyal dog, and a child's innocent heart. Maybe that's how grace truly works, in the ordinary moments that save us when we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. May God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are tonight.